My name is Joanne Miles. I'm 32 years old. 3 weeks ago, my parents stood up at their 40th wedding anniversary dinner and made an announcement in front of 30 guests. Next week, we're taking the whole family to Hawaii for another celebration. Everyone clapped. My younger sister Claire squealed with excitement beside her husband Evan, already talking about beaches and sunshine. I smiled too, picturing palm trees and ocean air. It would have been my first real vacation in years. Then I made the mistake of asking a simple question. What time is our flight? My father looked at me like I had suddenly spoken a foreign language. My mother's smile tightened just slightly. And right there in front of every guest in that room, my father said calmly, "You don't need to know the flight time, Joanne." I frowned. Why not? He cleared his throat. Because you're not coming. The room went quiet. Everyone was staring at me while my mother added as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. Someone has to stay behind and take care of the children. 30 pairs of eyes. 30 witnesses to the moment my own family made it clear that I wasn't really part of the family trip. But there was something they didn't know. A secret I had been building for 3 years. And that night I decided it was finally time to use it. Before continuing, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, but only if you genuinely enjoy it. And please let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I will read all the comments. Now let me tell you from the beginning. Now, to understand why that moment hurt the way it did, you need to understand my family. The Miles family lives in a large white colonial house in the suburbs outside Hartford, Connecticut. 4 bedrooms, 2-car garage. A front lawn trimmed so neatly it could have been photographed for a real estate magazine. The kind of house that silently announces to anyone driving past, "We've made it." My father, Richard Miles, retired 3 years ago from his job as a branch manager at a regional bank. For most of my childhood, he left the house in a pressed suit every morning and came home at 6 sharp every evening. Order, routine, reputation, those were the things that mattered to him. My mother, Elaine Miles, has never had a paid job. But if you asked her, she would tell you she's busier than any executive. She runs the church charity committee, organizes neighborhood fundraisers, and spends a remarkable amount of energy maintaining what she calls our family's image. According to her, everything from the way the lawn is cut to what car sits in the driveway reflects on all of us. Then there's my younger sister Claire. Claire is 3 years younger than me and has always been the star of the family. The charming one, the beautiful one, the one people noticed when she walked into a room. She married Evan Carter, a corporate lawyer whose firm's name Claire mentions in almost every conversation. They have 2 children, Lucas, who's 5, and Maya, who's 3, and a brand new black Lexus SUV that always gets the best parking spot in my parents' driveway. My car is a 10-year-old Honda Civic. Whenever I visit, it ends up parked on the street. "Joanne, could you move your car?" my mother will say casually. Evan's bringing the Lexus and people notice the driveway first. I never argued. I just moved the car. That's the strange thing about growing up as the invisible one in a family. Eventually, you stop noticing the small ways people have already decided you matter less. The better seat at the table, the nicer introduction to guests. The way my mother proudly introduces Claire by mentioning her husband's career. "This is my daughter Claire and her husband Evan. He's a partner at Walker and Green." Then she gestures toward me. "And this is Joanne. She helps out." Helps out. That's the phrase that follows me everywhere in my family. Some of the details that follow will be dramatized, aided by artificial intelligence, to sharpen the message and deepen the emotional experience. I hope you relax tonight. Listen with a calm mind and then sleep soundly. Now, let's continue. I work as a part-time accountant, mostly with small remote clients. The work is flexible and quiet, and the income is modest, nothing impressive by my family's standards. But I never told them about the other thing I do. The thing that started 3 years ago when my life fell apart. And the thing that changed everything. Before we get to that, though, let me explain what helping out actually looks like in the Miles family. Take Thanksgiving, for example. I arrive at my parents' house at 6 in the morning to start the turkey. I set the table using my mother's fine china, the one set I'm not allowed to use for eating, only for washing afterward. I arrange the flowers, polish the silverware, time the 7 different side dishes so everything is ready at the exact moment dinner begins. Claire usually arrives around noon wearing something soft and expensive, kisses everyone hello, and sits down while food is served. Christmas works the same way. Except that I also wrap most of the presents my mother buys because she claims her arthritis makes it difficult. Funny how that arthritis never stops her from playing bridge 3 afternoons a week. Birthday parties for my niece and nephew. I'm the entertainment coordinator, the cleanup crew, and the backup babysitter all at once. Last year, I spent 8 hours organizing Lucas's dinosaur-themed birthday party, while Claire went to get a manicure because, according to her, she desperately needed a break. The one time I asked if I could skip a family gathering because I had a deadline for a client, my mother's voice turned cold. Family comes first, Joanne, she said. We all make sacrifices. Except somehow I was always the only one making them. The moment that finally made me see the truth didn't happen at a holiday dinner or a birthday party. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was standing in my mother's kitchen, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing the heavy cast-iron pot she used for family dinners. The house was quiet. Everyone else had already gone home. The sink water had gone lukewarm and my hands were wrinkled from soaking. And suddenly, a strange thought crossed my mind. I couldn't remember the last time someone in my family had invited me somewhere without expecting me to work. Not to cook, not to clean, not to babysit. Just invited me. That realization sat in my chest like a stone. But the truth is, the real breaking point in my life had happened 3 years earlier. Back then, I had been dating a man named Daniel Brooks for 4 years. We had talked about marriage, about children, about the future we thought we were building together. Then one evening, he sat across from me on the couch in my apartment and said the words I still remember perfectly. Joanne, I care about you, but I don't think I'm in love with you anymore. I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. I don't understand, I whispered. He ran his hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. You're always there, he said. At first I thought he meant it kindly. Then he continued. You're reliable. You help everyone. You take care of everything. But sometimes it feels like you're just there. He struggled for the right words. Like furniture. Like wallpaper. Like wallpaper. After he left that night, I walked around my neighborhood for almost an hour without really seeing where I was going. Eventually, I wandered into a small pawn shop downtown. I don't even know why. Maybe I just needed to look at something that wasn't my life falling apart. That's when I saw it. A used Canon DSLR camera sitting in a glass case. The price tag read $180. It wasn't new. The body had small scratches and the strap looked worn. But when the shop owner let me hold it, the weight of it felt solid, real. I bought it with money I probably should have saved. And I didn't tell anyone. That camera became my secret. At first, I just walked around the city taking pictures of anything that caught my attention. But after a while, I started noticing a pattern in the images I liked most. They were all photographs of people most others ignored. An elderly woman waiting alone at a bus stop. A janitor leaning against a wall during a night shift break. The hands of a street vendor counting coins under a dim light. People the world passed by every day without seeing. People who looked exactly the way I felt. Invisible. I started calling the project Invisible Women, not publicly. At first, it was just a folder on my computer. Then one night, almost as a joke, I created an anonymous Instagram account. No real name, no face, just the photographs. Slowly, people started finding the images, then more people. 3 years later, that account had over 12,000 followers. Complete strangers leaving comments about how the photos made them feel seen, understood, noticed. I never told my family. I kept the camera wrapped in an old cashmere scarf at the back of my closet like it was something fragile and precious. Because in a strange way, it was. It was the only thing in my life that belonged entirely to me. Then, 3 weeks before my parents' anniversary party, something happened that I almost ignored completely. I received an email. The subject line read, Coastal Light Gallery Inquiry. At first, I assumed it was spam. But when I opened it, my hands started shaking. The message was from a gallery owner in Monterey, California. He had seen my Instagram account. He wanted to know if I would be interested in discussing my work. I stared at that email for 20 minutes. Then I closed my laptop without replying. Because good things like that didn't happen to people like me. At least that's what I believed at the time. There was only one person in my family who had ever truly seen me, my mother's younger sister, Aunt Margaret. In my family, she was known as the disappointment. She had never married. She followed her passion for ceramics instead of getting what my mother called a real job. 20 years ago, she moved to Carmel by the Sea in California and opened a small cafe with a pottery studio in the back. My mother still says things like Margaret threw her life away playing with clay. But I had been calling Aunt Margaret every Sunday night for the last 7 years. My mother didn't know. She was also the first person I ever showed one of my photographs to. I had sent her a single image one evening, almost embarrassed. Her reply came 10 minutes later. Joanne, this is extraordinary. You have a gift. I remember staring at that message and crying, because no one had ever used the word extraordinary to describe anything I had done before. And 3 weeks before that anniversary dinner, Aunt Margaret told me something that changed everything. She said quietly, I hope you don't mind, sweetheart, but I sent your Instagram page to someone I know. I felt my heart skip. A gallery owner, she continued. His name is Marcus Hale. He's looking for new artists. My voice nearly disappeared. Aunt Margaret. That's the gallery that emailed me. There was a pause. Then she said gently, I know. That night, after my conversation with Aunt Margaret, I finally replied to the email. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time before I started typing. The message I sent was polite, cautious, almost apologetic. I thanked Marcus Hale for reaching out and said I would be open to discussing the possibility of showing my work. I didn't tell anyone, not my parents, not my sister. No one. Because the truth was, part of me still believed it wasn't real, that the gallery would lose interest, that they'd realize they had contacted the wrong person. But a small, quiet hope had begun to grow. And then came my parents' 40th anniversary party, a milestone that, according to my mother, deserved a proper celebration, which meant 30 guests, a catered dinner, and an entire week of preparation that somehow became mostly my responsibility. The planning started 7 days before the event. I took 3 days off from my accounting clients to help set everything up. My mother said it would be impossible to manage everything otherwise. I ordered flowers, white roses, and peonies exactly the way she wanted them. I wrote 60 place cards by hand using the calligraphy style she insisted would look more elegant. I coordinated with the caterer, double-checked the seating chart, pressed the tablecloths, and polished the crystal glasses my parents had received as wedding gifts 40 years earlier. By the morning of the party, I was exhausted, but the house looked perfect. I arrived at 7 in the morning wearing jeans and a t-shirt because I knew I would spend most of the day running between the kitchen and dining room. For 10 hours, I moved nonstop, setting tables, lighting candles, rearranging chairs, helping the caterers prepare trays of appetizers. By 6 in the evening, the house looked like something from a magazine spread. Soft candlelight reflected off crystal glasses. The long dining table stretched across the living room, set for 30 guests with my mother's finest china. I went upstairs to change into a dress just before the guests arrived. It was simple. Black. Nothing fancy. Just something neat enough for a formal dinner. When I stepped into the hallway, my mother immediately stopped me. "Joanne," she said, looking me up and down. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that what you're wearing?" I glanced down at the dress. "It's black," I said carefully. "I thought it would be appropriate." She sighed. "Well, I suppose it's fine." Her voice lowered slightly. "Just remember to stay in the background tonight. This evening is about your father and me." I nodded. Of course. I always nodded. Guests started arriving around 7 o'clock. Men in sports jackets, women in cocktail dresses, neighbors, church friends, and former colleagues of my father's. 30 people who believed they knew the Miles family. None of them really knew me. My sister Claire arrived at 7:15, perfectly timed for maximum attention. She walked through the front door wearing a red designer dress she made sure everyone noticed. Her husband Evan followed behind her in a charcoal suit, holding the hands of their 2 children, who were dressed like they had stepped out of a clothing catalog. My mother rushed forward immediately. "Oh, Claire, you look stunning." She hugged her, kissed the children, and loudly greeted Evan. "You remember my daughter Claire and her husband Evan," she told several guests nearby. "Evan's a partner at his law firm now. We're so proud of him." There were congratulations and smiles all around. I watched from the kitchen doorway holding a tray of bruschetta. No one mentioned that I had done Evan's taxes for the past 3 years. For free. I spent the next hour moving through the room with trays of appetizers, refilling wine glasses, collecting empty plates, answering polite questions from guests who didn't recognize me. At one point, a woman in a pearl necklace took a crab cake from my tray and asked casually, "Are you with the catering company?" Before I could respond, my mother appeared beside me. "Oh no," she said lightly. "That's Joanne, my other daughter. She's helping out tonight." The woman smiled politely and turned away. My mother didn't notice the way that sentence landed. Or maybe she did. Later, Evan approached me with Maya squirming in his arms and Lucas tugging on his sleeve. "Hey," he said casually. "Can you take them for a bit?" "Not, would you mind?" "Not, thank you. Just a simple transfer of responsibility. Claire and I need to mingle." I took the kids. Of course I did. I fed them dinner in the kitchen. I wiped juice off Maya's dress when she spilled it. I told Lucas 3 different stories to keep him from running into the living room and interrupting the speeches. By the time I returned to the dining room, dessert was already being served. I realized then that I hadn't eaten anything all day. No one had thought to save me a plate. The announcement came at 9 o'clock, just after my mother's tiramisu was served. My father stood up from his chair and tapped his champagne glass lightly with a fork. The soft ringing sound cut through the conversations in the room. Within seconds, the guests grew quiet. 30 faces turned toward him with expectant smiles. My father cleared his throat and placed one hand on the back of my mother's chair. "Patricia," he began, then caught himself with a small laugh. "Elaine and I want to thank all of you for being here tonight." He always liked to sound practiced when he spoke in public. 40 years of marriage, he continued warmly. 4 decades of building this family, this home, this life. My mother beamed beside him. Across the table, Claire leaned her head on Evan's shoulder. Their children were finally quiet, playing with napkins and spoons. I stood near the doorway to the kitchen holding a stack of empty dessert plates. "And to celebrate this milestone," my father said, raising his glass slightly, "we have a surprise announcement." There was a ripple of curiosity around the room. My mother's eyes sparkled. He paused for dramatic effect. "Next week," he said, "we're taking the whole family to Hawaii." The reaction was immediate. People murmured with delight. "How wonderful. That's amazing. You two deserve it," Claire actually squealed. "Dad, that's incredible," Evan laughed. "The kids are going to love that." I felt something lift inside my chest. The whole family. For once, I imagined myself not cooking, not cleaning, not organizing schedules or babysitting. Just being included. A real vacation. I stepped forward slightly, allowing myself a small smile. That sounds incredible, I said. Then I asked the question, what time is our flight? The room fell silent. Not the comfortable silence from before. A different kind. My father's expression changed. Just slightly. He glanced toward my mother. Something passed between them, an unspoken understanding I had seen many times growing up, but had never quite deciphered until that moment. Then he looked back at me. Joanne, he said slowly, you don't need to know the flight time. I blinked. I'm sorry. My father cleared his throat again. Because you're not coming. The words hung in the air like something fragile that had just shattered. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I don't understand, I said quietly. My mother leaned forward slightly as if she were explaining something obvious. Someone needs to stay behind, she said calmly. Her voice carried the same tone she used when discussing grocery lists or household chores. Claire and Evan deserve a real vacation. Claire looked down at the table. Evan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. That means, my mother continued, you'll stay here and watch the children. For a moment I couldn't speak. But I started. My mother cut me off. Honestly, Joanne, she said, her voice sharpening slightly, you don't have anything important planned. A few guests shifted in their chairs. Megan Claire works hard, she continued. She deserves a break. Claire, who hadn't worked since Lucas was born. Claire, who had a nanny 3 days a week. Claire, who regularly told people she was exhausted from motherhood. It's only a week, Evan added casually, not even looking directly at me. The kids love you. I stood there in my simple black dress holding a stack of dirty plates, while 30 people watched me be quietly removed from my own family vacation. Some of the guests looked uncomfortable. Most simply looked away. One woman near the end of the table leaned toward her husband and whispered something. He nodded. I caught part of what she said. Poor thing. She must be used to it by now. The words landed harder than anything else that evening. The champagne glass in my hand started trembling slightly. I set it down carefully on a nearby tray before I dropped it. Then I set the plates down as well. Because suddenly, my hands didn't feel steady. Of course it would be me. I forced a smile. A polite one. The kind I had perfected after 32 years of being the helpful daughter. The reliable one. The one who didn't make scenes. Of course, I said. I understand. The lie came easily. I had practiced it my whole life. Inside my chest, though, something shifted. Not shattered. Not yet. But cracked. Like the quiet fault line before an earthquake. I excused myself quietly and walked back into the kitchen. No one tried to stop me. Why would they? The party continued without interruption. Laughter drifted from the dining room. Someone started telling a story about a golf trip. Glasses clinked together in casual toasts. I stood at the sink and stared at the marble countertop for a long moment. Then I closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, a different thought entered my mind. If they didn't see me as family, then maybe I didn't have to keep acting like I was. And standing there alone in my parents' kitchen listening to their celebration continue without me, I began making a very different kind of plan. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as staff. And staff can resign. It was almost midnight when I found the emails. The last of the guests had finally left the house. The laughter and music that had filled the rooms a few hours earlier had faded into silence. My parents had already gone upstairs to bed exhausted from an evening of congratulations about 40 years of marriage. I was alone in the living room folding tablecloths and stacking plates, finishing the quiet work that always seemed to fall to me. As I worked, I suddenly remembered a file I still needed to send to a client whose deadline I had pushed back just to help prepare this party. My laptop was at home. My mother's laptop was sitting on the kitchen counter. She won't mind, I told myself. She had borrowed my things countless times without asking. I opened the laptop and saw that Safari was already running. My mother's Gmail account was still logged in. I should have clicked away immediately. I should have respected her privacy and closed the window. But then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. My name appeared in the subject line of a recent email thread. Hawaii arrangements. Joanne situation. My finger hovered above the trackpad. I knew I shouldn't read it. I knew that whatever I found would probably hurt. Still, curiosity and a strange sense of dread pushed me forward. I clicked. The thread was between my mother Elaine Miles and my sister Claire. The first message was from my mother. Keep Joanne here to watch the kids. She doesn't have anything important going on anyway. Evan was right. It's basically like having free help. She should be grateful we give her something to do. Below, it was Claire's reply. Totally agree, Mom. She'll probably feel useful for once. It's kind of sad, honestly, but at least it works out for us. I read those words 3 times just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding them. Free help. She should be grateful. Kind of sad. The words burned on the screen. My chest felt tight, but my hands moved with calm precision. I took screenshots of the emails. I sent them to my own account. Then I deleted the message from the sent folder and cleared the browser history so no one would know I had seen them. After that, I sat down at the kitchen table in the dark house where I had grown up. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to fully understand what I really was to them. Not a daughter. Not a sister. Just help. I drove home around 1 in the morning through nearly empty streets. My apartment was small, a 1-bedroom place in an aging building that hadn't been renovated since the early 90s. Beige carpet, plain white walls, secondhand furniture I had slowly collected over the years. My mother had once called it depressing when she visited, but to me it had always been something else. It was the only place where I could breathe. I sat in the dark living room for a long time staring at my phone. One email glowed on the screen. Marcus Hale, the gallery owner from California. We had exchanged a few messages weeks earlier about my photography series. He had asked if I would be willing to bring my portfolio to Coastal Light Gallery so he could see the work in person. I had answered once politely, but I had never followed up. A part of me had assumed it was too good to be real, but now I realized something. I could go. I could actually go. Before I had time to talk myself out of it, I called the one person who would understand. My Aunt Margaret answered on the second ring, even though it was well past midnight. Joanne. What's wrong? I told her everything. The announcement at the party. The humiliation in front of 30 guests. The emails I had just read. My voice cracked only once when I repeated the words, free help. When I finished, there was silence for a moment. Then Aunt Margaret spoke gently but firmly. Joanne, I have a spare room above the cafe. I could use help with the morning shift anyway. And that gallery Marcus runs, it's only 20 minutes from here. I hesitated. Aunt Margaret, I can't just leave everything behind. Yes, you can, she said. You can choose yourself for once. The only person stopping you is you. We hung up around 2 in the morning. By 6, I had started packing. 3 suitcases stood by the door. My camera equipment, my laptop, and the soft cashmere scarf that had always wrapped my Canon camera were carefully packed inside. I left behind almost everything else, including the glittery apron Claire once gave me that said, "World's Best Aunt." For the first time in 32 years, I was choosing myself. Have you ever had to choose between your family and yourself? If so, please leave a 1 in the comments. That lets me know you're still here listening and helps me realize I'm not alone. 2 days before my family's Hawaii trip, I drove to my parents' house one last time. The late afternoon sun was pouring through the living room windows, lighting up the familiar furniture that had barely changed since I was a child. My mother, Elaine Miles, was standing near the coffee table, carefully coordinating outfits for the vacation, laying out dresses and beachwear as if she were planning a photo shoot rather than a family trip. My sister Claire sat comfortably on the couch, scrolling through luxury resort reviews on her phone. Her husband, Evan Carter, was somewhere upstairs, most likely pacing during another work call. My father, Richard Miles, sat in his armchair reading the newspaper the way he always did, present in body, but absent in attention. I stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling strangely calm. "I need to tell you something," I said. My mother barely glanced up. "If it's about the children's schedule, Claire already sent it to you." "It's not about that," I replied quietly. I took a breath to steady myself. "I'm not watching the kids. I won't be available." That finally got their attention. Claire's head snapped up from her phone. My mother's hands froze above a stack of sundresses. "What do you mean you won't be available?" my mother asked sharply. "I have a work opportunity in California. I'm leaving tomorrow." "California?" My father slowly lowered his newspaper and looked at me for the first time since I walked in. "What kind of work opportunity?" "It's professional. Something I've been working toward for a long time." I didn't offer any more details. I didn't feel like I owed them any explanations anymore. Claire stared at me as if I had just spoken another language. "Joanne, you can't be serious. I'm counting on you. We planned everything around you helping with the kids. You planned around me without ever asking me," I said quietly. "I'm not canceling my life because you assumed I didn't have one." The silence in the room was heavy. Then my mother stood up, her voice turning cold. "This is incredibly selfish, Joanne. Claire needs your help. Family comes first." "Family comes first," I repeated slowly. "Except when it comes to inviting me to Hawaii." My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. For once, Elaine Miles didn't have an answer. My father cleared his throat. "If you leave, don't expect us to welcome you back with open arms." "I understand," I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The next 24 hours became a masterclass in emotional pressure. My mother called 6 times. Each voicemail grew more dramatic than the last. She accused me of tearing the family apart and abandoning my responsibilities. She said my father was devastated, and that he barely touched his dinner. Claire called too, crying and insisting she didn't know how she would manage without me. She said the children kept asking where Aunt Joanne was going. Then came the message that nearly broke my resolve. "You're going to end up alone, you know, just like Aunt Margaret." "Is that what you want?" I stared at the message for a long time. They meant it as an insult. They meant it to scare me. But Aunt Margaret had built a life that belonged entirely to her. She had her cafe, her pottery studio, her art, and a town full of people who respected her. She was happy. Maybe ending up like Aunt Margaret wasn't a threat. Maybe it was a promise. I turned off my phone. The last thing I did before leaving Boston was walk slowly through my apartment. 3 suitcases waited near the door. Everything else stayed behind. The secondhand couch, the worn beige carpet, the quiet life I had built around everyone else's expectations. I taped my spare key to an envelope and slid it under my landlord's door. Month-to-month lease. Paid through the end of January, a clean break. As the sun rose the next morning, I loaded my car. My 10-year-old Honda Civic waited in the parking lot, the same car my mother had always found embarrassing. To me, it suddenly looked like freedom. I didn't look back when I drove away. The drive from Boston to Carmel by the sea would take about 45 hours if you rushed it. I didn't rush. I stretched the journey into 5 days, stopping at roadside motels and quiet diners where nobody knew my name or my past. Somewhere in Nebraska, I pulled over at a rest stop and watched the sunset spread across the prairie in waves of gold and soft pink. I lifted my camera and captured the moment. The photograph felt different from anything I had taken before. It was the first picture I took as a free woman. On the 3rd day, my phone buzzed when I turned it on to check directions. A message from Claire appeared. Mom says if you're not home when we get back from Hawaii, you're dead to her. I read it once, then deleted it. She had already been acting like I didn't exist anyway. At least now I would be alive somewhere else. On the fourth day, I called Aunt Margaret from a gas station in Arizona. I'm about 8 hours away, I told her. Your room is ready, she said warmly. Fresh sheets, ocean view, and Marcus Hale wants to meet you tomorrow afternoon if you're ready. Tomorrow. That's so soon. Joanne, she said gently. You've been waiting 3 years for this moment. It's not soon. It's finally. When I crossed into California, something inside me shifted. The Pacific Ocean appeared to my left, wide and endless under the fading sunlight. I rolled down the window and breathed in the salty air. For the first time in years, I felt possibility instead of pressure. At 7 in the evening on the 5th day, I pulled into the driveway of the Ceramic Cup Aunt Margaret's Cafe and Pottery Studio in Carmel by the sea. She was waiting on the porch when I pulled into the driveway, her arms already open before I even stepped out of the car. Aunt Margaret looked exactly the way I remembered her warm eyes, wind-tangled hair, and that calm confidence that always made people feel safe. When I reached the steps, she wrapped me in a hug that seemed to dissolve the exhaustion of the last 5 days. Welcome home, she said softly. And for the first time in 32 years, the word home actually felt real. Carmel by the Sea was the kind of place that almost didn't feel real when you first arrived. The streets were lined with cottages that looked like they belonged in a storybook, with crooked rooftops and flower boxes spilling over with color. Art galleries seemed to appear on every corner. Ocean mist drifted through tall cypress trees and rolled gently over the rooftops in the early evening. The entire town felt less like a city and more like a painting someone had imagined into existence. Aunt Margaret's Cafe sat on a quiet street just 2 blocks from the beach. The sign above the door read, "The Ceramic Cup," in hand-painted letters. Blue shutters framed the windows and lavender overflowed from wooden flower boxes beneath them. The back half of the building housed her pottery studio, where she taught classes and sold handmade pieces to tourists who wandered in after smelling fresh coffee and baked scones. My room was upstairs. It was small, but bright and welcoming. A bed covered with a white quilt stood near the wall. A wooden desk sat beside the window, and when I looked outside, I could see the Pacific Ocean stretching toward the horizon. The sight of it filled my chest with something that felt unfamiliar, but wonderful. That night, we ate dinner in the cafe after closing. You'll work the morning shift, Aunt Margaret explained while pouring tea. 6 to noon. After that, the day belongs to you. I shook my head slightly. I don't even know how to thank you for letting me stay here. She waved away the comment as if it were unnecessary. Don't thank me. Just build something with your life. That's more than enough. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky outside the window was still dark blue when I tied on an apron. It wasn't the glittery world's best aunt apron I had left behind in Boston. This one was simple canvas with the ceramic cup embroidered across the front in blue thread. Aunt Margaret showed me how to prepare pour-over coffee and warm the trays of fresh scones she had baked before sunrise. Customers began to arrive shortly after 6. Some were locals who greeted my aunt by name and chatted easily while sipping coffee. Others were tourists drawn in by the smell of pastries and the charm of the small cafe. I took orders, wiped tables, and spoke with strangers who had no idea that only 5 days earlier I had driven across the country and walked away from my entire old life. By noon, I had earned $37 in tips. It wasn't a fortune, but it felt strangely satisfying. I realized I had smiled more in those 6 hours than I had in the previous 6 months. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, I had an appointment at Coastal Light Gallery. I showered quickly, changed into the nicest dress I owned, and walked the 3 blocks through town toward the gallery. My heart was beating fast as I pushed open the glass door. Marcus Hale looked nothing like the intimidating gallery owner I had imagined. Instead of a polished businessman in an expensive suit, the man who greeted me had silver hair, weathered features, and kind, thoughtful eyes. He wore a linen shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows and greeted me with a relaxed smile. "Joanne Miles," he said, shaking my hand. "Your aunt has told me quite a bit about you. But honestly, your work speaks louder than anything she could say." He led me through the gallery space. White walls reflected soft, natural light that poured in from tall windows. Photographs and paintings hung carefully arranged throughout the room. The atmosphere felt quiet and serious, a place where art truly mattered. "I've spent quite a bit of time looking through your Instagram," Marcus said, as we stopped near a large monitor displaying my portfolio. "Your series, Invisible Women, is extraordinary. There's honesty in those images that most photographers spend decades trying to capture." I wasn't sure how to respond. No one had ever spoken about my work that way before. Marcus pointed to one photograph on the screen. "This one is the image that made me contact you." It was a photo I had taken 2 years earlier. An elderly woman stood alone at a bus stop, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her face carried a lifetime of quiet resilience. "There's something in her eyes," Marcus continued. "Patience, perhaps. Maybe resignation. It's powerful." "She had been waiting nearly 40 minutes for the bus," I explained quietly. "No one stopped to ask if she needed help." Marcus nodded slowly. "You really see people, Joanne. Not just their faces, but their stories. That's rare." He paused for a moment before speaking again. "I'd like to offer you a solo exhibition here at Coastal Light Gallery. 15 pieces. Opening in 6 weeks. We'll cover printing, framing, and promotion. You keep 60% of every sale." For a moment, I thought I had misheard him. A week later, I sat at Marcus's desk signing the contract. Sunlight streamed through the gallery windows as I read through the pages carefully. The document outlined everything clearly. 15 photographs, an opening exhibition in late August. The gallery would handle all production costs while I would receive 60% of all sales. Fair terms, Marcus assured me. But what overwhelmed me wasn't the financial agreement. It was seeing my name printed at the top of the contract. Artist Joanne Miles. For years, I had helped my family with taxes, organized their events, and cared for their children without recognition. My name had never appeared anywhere important. Now it was on a legal document that recognized my work as something valuable. Marcus pointed to the exhibition title near the bottom of the page. "We're proposing Invisible Women Portraits of the Overlooked," he said. "What do you think, Invisible Women?" I whispered. "It's perfect." I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Marcus signed beneath it as witness. For the first time in my life, something I had created was finally stepping out of the shadows and into the light. The document was notarized by Marcus Hale's assistant, a young woman named Julia, who stamped the pages carefully with practiced precision. The sound of the official seal pressing into the paper felt strangely significant. When everything was finished, Marcus slid my copy of the contract across the desk toward me. "Congratulations, Joanne," he said with an easy smile. "You're officially a represented artist." For a moment, I simply stared at the paper in my hands. I walked out of the gallery holding the contract close against my chest, like something fragile and precious. It felt like physical proof of something I had struggled to believe for years. Proof that I was not invisible. Proof that I had never been nothing. For 3 years, I had quietly built something in the background of my life. Now, it was finally stepping into the light. While I was beginning my new life in California, my family back in Boston was slowly discovering what my absence actually meant. I didn't witness any of it myself. Later, I pieced together the story from a strange mix of voicemails, text messages, and one very uncomfortable phone call from my father. Apparently, the Hawaii trip had not gone as smoothly as everyone expected. Without me, there to watch the children, Claire and Evan couldn't enjoy a single adults-only dinner during the entire vacation. My nephew Lucas threw a loud tantrum on the beach because no one had remembered to pack his special sandcastle bucket, something I always packed without being asked. On the third day, my niece Maya developed a painful ear infection, and nobody could find the pediatrician's phone number because I had always been the one who kept track of medical information. My mother spent most of the vacation complaining that the resort staff wasn't attentive enough. She called the concierge multiple times about minor inconveniences and sent back her drink twice at dinner one evening. "This trip isn't relaxing at all," she reportedly said loudly. "Who planned this vacation?" My father, according to Claire, wisely chose not to remind her that she had planned it herself. The messages started arriving on the fourth day. "Joanne, where are the kids' medication records? Joanne, what's Lucas's bedtime routine? He won't sleep. Joanne, this restaurant doesn't have a kids' menu. What do they usually eat?" I didn't answer any of them. I was too busy printing proofs at a photography lab in Monterey, selecting frames for the exhibition, and meeting with a journalist from Carmel Living magazine who wanted to interview me about my work. Absence has a way of revealing what people have taken for granted. On the sixth day of their Hawaiian vacation, Claire did something she had never done before. Out of frustration or curiosity, she searched my name online. For the first time in her life, she found something other than a blank page. 6 weeks later, I stood in the center of Coastal Light Gallery on the night of my opening exhibition, and I still struggled to believe it was real. 15 of my photographs hung along the white walls, each printed large and framed in simple black. Soft lighting filled the gallery, illuminating each image carefully. A small string quartet played near the back corner of the room. That had been Marcus's idea. A bartender in a crisp white shirt poured champagne while guests slowly moved through the space studying the photographs. There were about 50 people in the gallery that night. Some were local artists I had met through Aunt Margaret. Others were collectors Marcus had invited personally. The journalist from Carmel Living magazine stood near the wall scribbling notes in a small notebook. People moved from photograph to photograph, studying them quietly. My photographs. Seeing them displayed with price tags beside them made my head spin. I wore a navy dress that was simple but elegant. My hair was down, something I rarely did, and I had even put on lipstick. Aunt Margaret appeared beside me and pressed a glass of champagne gently into my hand. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Terrified," I admitted with a nervous laugh. "What if nobody buys anything?" Aunt Margaret smiled slightly and nodded toward the center wall. "Someone already has." I followed her gaze and saw a small red dot beside the label of the photograph that had first caught Marcus's attention. The bus stop portrait of the elderly woman. "That's Mrs. Dalton," Aunt Margaret whispered. "She owns half the art in Monterey County. She just bought that photograph for $3,000. $3,000. For something I had created." Before I had time to process that thought, Marcus appeared beside me, smiling broadly. "Joanne," he said, "there's someone from the magazine I'd like you to meet. They're considering featuring you on next month's cover." The words barely registered. A magazine cover. My name. My face. My story. I had just begun speaking with the journalist when the gallery door opened behind us. Something about the sudden shift in the room made me turn around. And then I saw them. Claire and Evan stood in the entrance, both still lightly sunburned from their trip to Hawaii. They looked completely out of place among the gallery guests. Claire wore a bright floral sundress that looked more appropriate for a beach brunch than an art opening. Evan stood beside her, scrolling through something on his phone with a puzzled expression. They both scanned the room slowly, their expressions filled with the same mixture of confusion and judgment I had seen my entire life whenever they encountered something unfamiliar. Then Claire's eyes found me. "Joanne," she said loudly. Before I could react, she hurried toward me with her arms outstretched as if we were reuniting after a long and painful separation. "Oh my God, We've been so worried about you. Claire's voice carried across the gallery as she rushed toward me. Nearly 50 guests turned their heads at the same moment. The string quartet faltered for half a beat before quickly recovering and continuing their music. Claire, I said calmly, forcing my voice to stay steady. This is unexpected. We had to come, she said breathlessly. Her eyes were wide and overly earnest. We flew in yesterday. Mom found your Instagram and she's been calling everyone trying to figure out where you disappeared to. Evan stepped up behind her, giving me a brief nod as if we were meeting at a business conference instead of in the middle of my art exhibition. Joanne, he said casually, glancing around the room. Nice place. It's a gallery, I replied. My gallery opening, actually. Claire blinked as if she had just noticed the photographs on the walls. Her eyes moved slowly from one frame to another, then to the guests holding champagne glasses, then to the small price tags beside each piece. You did all this? She asked, her voice filled with genuine confusion. Since about 3 years ago, I said quietly. You just never asked what I did with my time. Aunt Margaret appeared beside me, then standing close enough that I could feel her quiet support. Across the room, Marcus Hale was watching the situation carefully, clearly ready to step in if things became uncomfortable. Claire leaned closer to me and lowered her voice. Joanne, I have news, she said quickly. I'm pregnant again. Number 3. I nodded politely. And I really need you to come home, she continued. Evan's work schedule is insane right now. Mom isn't much help with the kids. I honestly don't know how we're going to manage. There it was. Not an apology, not congratulations, just need. Always their need. The words hung between us in the air. I need you. I had heard that sentence more times than I could count. Every holiday, every family gathering, every birthday party for the children. I had rearranged my entire life to fit into the small invisible space they had created for me. Claire, I said gently, I'm in the middle of my opening night. I know, she replied quickly, glancing around again. And this is nice. Really. She waved a hand vaguely toward the photographs, as if my entire career were a charming hobby. But we can talk about this later, she continued. Right now, I just need to know when you're coming back to Boston. She's not coming back. Aunt Margaret's voice cut cleanly through the conversation. She lives here now. Evan stepped forward immediately, irritation flashing across his face. With all due respect, Margaret, he said stiffly. This is family business. Family business. Aunt Margaret laughed softly, though there was nothing amused in the sound. You mean the family that uninvited her from a vacation and referred to her as free help in emails she was never supposed to read. Claire's face turned pale. Around us, the quiet murmur of the gallery faded. Guests had stopped pretending not to listen. The journalist from Carmel Living magazine had paused near the wall, her pen moving quickly across her notebook. That's not... We didn't mean it like that, Claire stammered. How exactly did you mean it? The new voice belonged to a woman standing a few feet away. Mrs. Dalton held a champagne glass in one hand as she studied the scene with open curiosity. I'm sorry, Evan said tightly. And who are you? I'm someone who just paid $3,000 for that young woman's photograph, she replied, calmly nodding toward the bus stop portrait behind me. And someone who is very interested in understanding why her family believes she should abandon her career to become a babysitter. The room grew noticeably colder. Claire turned back toward me, desperation creeping into her voice. Joanne, please, she whispered. Let's talk somewhere private. For a moment, I thought about doing exactly that. For most of my life, I would have. I would have stepped aside, lowered my voice, apologized for making anyone uncomfortable. But not tonight. For 32 years, I had made myself smaller so everyone else could feel comfortable. Not tonight. I stepped forward into the center of the gallery, my voice calm but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. Claire, I understand that you're pregnant. Congratulations. I truly mean that. But I will not be coming back to Boston to take care of your children. Joanne, I'm not finished. My voice remained steady. You can hire a nanny, I continued. You can hire two if you want. Evan earns more than enough at Walker and Green, and spending money has never seemed to be a problem for your household. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the guests. But what you cannot do, I said, is hire me. Because I was never paid. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. Around us, the gallery had gone completely silent. This, I continued, gesturing toward the photographs surrounding us, is not a hobby. This is my work. I've been building it quietly for 3 years while everyone in my family assumed I had nothing important to do. I pointed toward the photograph Mrs. Dalton had purchased. That piece sold tonight for $3,000. In total, I've sold 4 photographs so far this evening. $8,000. The numbers seemed to echo in the still room. My work has value, I said calmly. And so do I. I will not give that up to return to being free help. Absolute silence filled the gallery. Evan cleared his throat awkwardly. Claire's eyes filled with tears. This time, they looked real, not the dramatic ones she used when she wanted sympathy. Then Marcus began clapping. Aunt Margaret joined him immediately. Mrs. Dalton lifted her champagne glass in a quiet toast. One by one, the other guests followed. Applause spread slowly through the gallery, not for the photographs on the walls. For me. For the moment I finally stopped being invisible and said enough. I didn't smile triumphantly. I didn't gloat or savor the moment the way some people might have. I simply looked at my sister and spoke quietly. I hope your pregnancy goes well, I said. I truly do. Then I turned and walked away. The conversation in the gallery slowly resumed around me. People returned to studying the photographs and sipping champagne. The string quartet continued playing softly in the corner. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe the drama was over. 20 minutes later, the gallery door opened again. I was speaking with the journalist from Carmel Living magazine when I felt a shift in the room. The quiet change in atmosphere made me glance toward the entrance. And there they were. My parents stood in the doorway as if they had stepped out of a nightmare and into my new life. My mother, Elaine Miles, wore her beige Burberry trench coat, the one she reserved for events she considered important. My father, Richard Miles, stood just behind her wearing a navy blazer, looking uncomfortable and slightly lost among the gallery guests. They scanned the room slowly until their eyes locked onto me. Then, my mother began walking toward me with the same determined stride she had used my entire childhood. "Joanne," she said sharply. Her voice carried the same tone she had used when I was 8 years old and had accidentally tracked mud across her freshly cleaned floors. "We need to talk." The journalist beside me raised one curious eyebrow but stepped back politely. I excused myself and moved quickly to intercept my parents before they could create an even bigger scene in the middle of the gallery. "You came all this way?" I said calmly. "Of course we did." My mother replied, her voice tight with indignation. "You disappeared without telling anyone where you were going. You abandoned your family when we needed you the most. And now I find you here pretending to be an artist while your sister is pregnant and struggling." "Claire is pregnant and wealthy," I corrected quietly. "She isn't struggling. She's inconvenienced." "Don't be cruel, Joanne," my mother snapped. "This isn't who you are." "You're right," I said after a slow breath. "This isn't the version of me you're used to. The one who quietly did whatever you asked." I looked directly at her. That Joanne was never seen. She was only used. My father cleared his throat nervously. "Joanne, your mother is just trying to say I know exactly what she's trying to say, Dad," I interrupted gently. "I've heard the same message my entire life. Family comes first. Make sacrifices. Don't be selfish." I held his gaze. "But I wasn't part of the family trip to Hawaii. Remember? So which is it?" I gestured slightly between us. "Am I family or not?" Neither of them answered. My mother recovered first. Hawaii was just one trip, she said dismissively. You're blowing this completely out of proportion. Someone had to stay with the children. Someone, I repeated slowly. Why me? Why always me? Because you have the time, she replied immediately. You're not married. You don't have children. What else would you be doing? For a long time, I had wondered whether I would ever use the screenshots of those emails. Part of me had hoped I would never need to. But standing there in the center of my gallery, surrounded by my work, and by people who actually saw me, I realized something. Some truths needed to be spoken out loud. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Let me read you something, I said calmly. It's an email you sent to Claire before the anniversary party. My mother's face turned pale. Keep Joanne here to watch the kids, I read slowly. She doesn't have anything important to do anyway. It's basically like having free help. She should be grateful we give her something to do. The gallery fell completely silent again. Every guest in the room was watching us. And Claire replied, I continued. She'll probably feel useful for once. It's kind of sad. Across the room, Claire stood frozen, looking as if she wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. Joanne, my father said quietly. Where did you find? It doesn't matter where I found it, I replied. What matters is that you wrote it. I lowered my phone slowly. I'm not reading this to embarrass anyone. I'm reading it so you understand why I left. You didn't see me as family, I continued. You saw me as staff. And staff has the right to quit. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time in my entire life, Elaine Miles had absolutely nothing to say. The journalist from Carmel Living magazine continued writing quickly in her notebook. It was Evan who finally broke the silence. This is ridiculous, he said sharply as he stepped forward. Joanne, you're creating a scene over nothing. Your family asked you to babysit. That's what families do. Not everyone gets to run away across the country pretending to be an artist. Pretending, the word came from behind him. Mrs. Dalton stepped forward slowly, her voice cool and unmistakably sharp. I just spent $3,000 on one of her photographs, she said. I don't pay that kind of money for pretend. Evan turned toward her, his confident expression cracking slightly. With respect, ma'am, you don't know this family. This situation doesn't concern you. Mrs. Dalton set her champagne glass down carefully. Actually, she said, I know exactly what I need to know. I know that young woman has spent years photographing people society overlooks. She gestured toward the gallery walls. And it appears her own family overlooked her just as thoroughly. A low murmur spread through the room. Guests were no longer pretending not to listen. They were openly staring now. It was the kind of attention my mother had spent decades chasing in social circles. Just not like this. This is a misunderstanding, my mother said quickly, trying to recover control. Family jokes are being taken out of context. A joke. Another voice spoke up. It was an older woman with silver hair who had purchased one of my photographs earlier that evening. Telling your daughter she has nothing important to do and calling her free help is supposed to be funny. More murmurs followed. My mother's carefully built social reputation seemed to be dissolving right in front of her. Aunt Margaret stepped forward calmly. I think it might be time for you to leave, she said gently. My mother's face flushed deep red. My father placed a hand on her arm, guiding her toward the exit. Claire stood several steps away, wiping tears from her face. Even Evan had finally fallen silent, realizing that none of his usual arguments were working here. My mother paused at the door and turned back toward me. You'll regret this, she said, her voice shaking. I met her eyes. No, I replied quietly. I really won't. And this time, she left. My mother turned sharply without another word and walked out of the gallery, pulling my father along with her. The glass door closed behind them with a quiet click that somehow sounded louder than a slammed door. Claire remained standing in the room for a moment longer. Her mascara had begun to smudge, and her arms were wrapped tightly around herself like a child who had just been caught doing something wrong. "Joanne," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't know you felt this way. I thought you liked helping." "No," I said gently. "I wasn't angry anymore. You didn't think about it at all. None of you did." Evan placed a hand on Claire's shoulder, but for once he had nothing to say. Maybe for the first time he realized that none of his confident arguments were going to fix this moment. "I hope your pregnancy is healthy," I added quietly. "I really do. And I hope the kids grow up happy. But I can't be their built-in aunt anymore." Claire wiped her eyes. "If you want to be part of my life," I continued, "things have to be different. They have to be equal." She nodded slowly, tears still sliding down her cheeks. "I understand," she whispered. I wasn't entirely sure she did. But for the first time in my life, it wasn't my responsibility to make sure she did. Claire and Evan left through the same door my parents had used. As soon as it closed behind them, the entire gallery seemed to release a breath it had been holding. Aunt Margaret stepped beside me and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "I think so," I said. I let out a small, shaky laugh. I just confronted my entire family in the middle of my own art exhibition. "You did," Aunt Margaret replied warmly. "And you were magnificent." Marcus Hale approached us a moment later carrying a fresh glass of champagne. He handed it to me with a smile. "For what it's worth," he said, "I've been running galleries for 20 years. I've never seen an opening night quite like this one. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" I asked. Marcus chuckled. "Let's just say everyone in this room is going to remember your name. And for an artist, that's not the worst outcome." I looked around the gallery again. My photographs hung along the walls under warm lights. Guests were still studying them, discussing them quietly. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible. By the time the gallery closed later that night, 8 of the 15 photographs had sold. The total came to $14,000. 60% of that belonged to me. Marcus handed me a printed summary of the sales as the last guests drifted out the door. $8,400, he said. "Not bad for an opening night." I stared at the number for a long moment. It was more money than I had earned in 3 months of part-time accounting work. "Mrs. Dalton would also like to commission a piece," Marcus added. "She owns a vacation home in Big Sur and wants you to photograph the coastline." "A commission?" I asked. "Private collectors do it all the time," Marcus explained. "She liked the way you see the world." He handed me a business card with her assistant's contact information. "And the magazine interview went very well," he added. "They're considering you for the cover next month." A magazine cover. My name. My face. My story. Later that night, Aunt Margaret helped me carry the remaining unsold photographs back to my small room above the cafe. 7 pieces were still waiting for the right buyers, but that didn't feel discouraging. 7 meant people had already seen value in my work. I placed the check Marcus had given me on the desk beside my window and took a picture of it with my phone. Not to post online, but simply to remember the moment. Payable to Joanne Miles, $8,400. Proof that I had never been nothing. 2 months passed and my new life slowly settled into a rhythm. I woke up at 5 each morning and watched the sunrise over the Pacific through my bedroom window. At 6, I opened the ceramic cup with Aunt Margaret. The mornings were filled with the smell of coffee and fresh pastries, conversations with regular customers, and the quiet comfort of routine. By noon, my shift ended, and the rest of the day belonged to my photography. I rented a small studio 3 blocks away, where I edited images and printed new work. Marcus had already scheduled my next exhibition for spring. The series would be called Boundaries, photographs about edges, about the invisible lines between belonging and independence, about the moment when care becomes expectation and love becomes obligation. It felt like the most honest work I had ever created. The magazine article came out in October. My face appeared on the cover of Carmel Living magazine beside the headline, "The Artist Who Learned to See Herself." The story told the truth about my journey, though the journalist changed a few names to protect certain people. But the heart of it was still there. The invisibility, the breaking point, the choice to leave. After the article was published, my inbox filled with messages. Many came from women who said they had spent years being the responsible one in their families, the helper, the invisible daughter. Some wrote that my story gave them permission to finally think about their own lives. My family reached out eventually too. Claire sent a message a few weeks after her baby was born, a little girl named Charlotte. She included a photograph of the baby wrapped in a pink blanket. I replied with congratulations and a gift card. Nothing more. My mother called once. I didn't answer. Her voicemail asked if I had gotten this phase out of my system yet. I deleted it. My father surprised me, though. One Tuesday evening, I received a short email from him. "Joanne, I saw the magazine article. I'm proud of you." 3 sentences. I kept that message. Now I'm sitting in my studio looking out at the Pacific Ocean again. The Canon camera I bought years ago from that small pawn shop still rests on a shelf. It's scratched and worn, but it still works perfectly. Next to it sits a newer camera I bought with money earned from my photographs. Both of them matter. One taught me how to see the world. The other proved that the world could finally see me back. My second exhibition opens next month. 15 new photographs exploring the edges between family and self, between loyalty and freedom. It might be the best work I've ever done. Aunt Margaret still brings me coffee every morning. Marcus calls once a week with updates about collectors and new opportunities. The regulars at the cafe have even started requesting the little table by the window where I sometimes edit photos in the afternoons. I'm not rich. I'm not famous. But I'm seen. And that is enough. My family and I exist differently now. We exchange occasional holiday messages and updates about the children. The distance between us is quiet but healthy. I haven't returned to Boston yet. Maybe someday I will. But only as a visitor. Never again as the help. A few days ago, I was sorting through old photographs and found a self-portrait I took years ago in the mirror of my Boston apartment. The woman in that image looked tired and defeated, like she was waiting for someone else to give her permission to exist. I deleted the photo. That woman doesn't live here anymore. In her place is someone who takes up space, who creates beautiful things, and who finally understands that choosing herself was never selfish. It was freedom. This experience changed the way I understand family loyalty and self-respect. I used to believe that being needed meant being valued, but sometimes the truth is harder. Being useful is not the same as being loved. The moment I stepped away, I finally saw how much of myself I had been giving away just to keep the peace. What surprised me most was this. Once I stopped shrinking space, opened up for something better, dignity, creativity, and people who actually saw me. So I want to ask you something honestly. If you were standing where I stood between staying comfortable for everyone else or choosing your own path, what would you do? Would you stay, or would you walk away and build something new? And while you're listening right now, tell me in the comments where in the world you're hearing this story from. If this story moved you even a little, consider subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, or sharing the video. It might feel like a small click, but it helps stories like this reach people who feel invisible in their own lives. Your action could be the moment that helps someone else realize they deserve to be seen too.